The Birth of the RAF by Richard Overy. Read by Jonathan Keeble. Preface. The Royal Air Force was formally activated on the 1st of April 1918, April Fool's Day. It was an inauspicious date on which to launch the world's first independent air force, and there were hesitations about choosing it. Perhaps the Army and the Royal Navy, both for their own reasons wary of the fledgling service, quietly approved the choice of date, hoping that a separate air force would soon prove itself a joke. They certainly both hoped that the RAF and the new Air Ministry it served would not last beyond the end of the war. In this, they were soon to be disabused. The RAF survived victory in 1918 and has survived regular calls for its dissolution since, and now celebrates an uninterrupted 100 years. The birth of the RAF was surrounded by argument and controversy. There already were two air services fighting Britain's aerial contribution to the First World War, the Royal Naval Air Service and the Army's Royal Flying Corps. The establishment of an entirely new branch of the armed forces was a political decision, prompted by the German air attacks on London in 1917, not a decision dictated by military necessity. The politicians wanted a force to defend the home front against the novel menace of bombing, amidst fears that the staying power of the population might be strained to breaking point by the raids. From the politicians' viewpoint, the air defence of Great Britain was one of the principal charges on the new force, and it is the defence of the home islands 22 years later in the Battle of Britain that is still remembered as the RAF's finest hour. The reality of the past 100 years has been rather different. The RAF has principally served overseas, and for most of the century was a force dedicated to bombing and to ground support for the other services. This future was anticipated in the final 7 months of combat in 1918, when the RAF, building on the legacy of its two predecessors, contributed substantially to the air support of Allied armies in Western Europe and the Middle East, and organised the independent force, independent of the front line, for the long-range bombing of German industrial towns. By the time of the armistice in November 1918, the shape of RAF doctrine was already in firm outline, even if its future as a separate force was thrown into doubt once the fighting was over. The birth pangs of the RAF are the subject here. Founding a new service in the midst of a bitterly contested conflict raised all kinds of practical questions which had to be resolved, from the colour of uniforms to the very name itself. The long history of the RAF as an institution was given shape in the earliest days of its existence. There are numerous records to help reconstruct those early days, and a wealth of memoir and historical literature to draw on. I am grateful for the help I have received in the archives and libraries I have exploited, and for the encouragement of the staff at the RAF Museum at Hendon, where I have been privileged to chair the research board. This volume is a small contribution to the wider programme of commemoration in which the museum is engaged. My thanks, as ever, to my agents, Jill Coleridge and Cara Jones, and to Simon Winder and the team at Penguin, and particular thanks to one of my colleagues on the research board, the head of the Air Historical Branch, Sebastian Cox, for his sound advice on an earlier draft. Needless to say, the views expressed throughout are my own, as are any errors of fact or interpretation that might remain. Richard Overy, Exeter and London, 2017. Chapter 1. Britain and the War in the Air. A fixed determination to attack and win will be the surest road to victory. RFC Training Manual, 1913. In 1908, only 5 years after the Wright Brothers' first powered flight in December 1903, the British novelist H.G. Wells published The War in the Air, in which he imagined a near future when aircraft would decide the outcome of modern war. The novel's hero, Bert Smallways, watching the destruction of New York by...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?